I was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 28, and which may be a little bit unusual. A lot of folks, think of it as something that develops during childhood. But I had my first seizure at 28. It was a grand mal seizure, a tonic clonic, and really quite out of the blue. It was a bit of a scary experience. Very scary experience for me and also for my two roommates at the time. At the time, I lived in New York City. I was a high school teacher, and I was at home one day, and my roommates and I were sitting around talking about what we were going to eat for dinner, sort of thing, and I started to feel very lightheaded, and started to get sort of an aura, as I say, right? I would felt very sort of dizzy and lightheaded. The sound of my roommates talking became sort of distorted, almost like if you've ever, as a kid, you put a tube of, a paper towel tube up to your ear, and you kind of hear everything in an echo. That's sort of what I heard and what I felt. So I kind of, stood up to try to clear my head, and the next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance heading to the hospital. Went through the protocol of all kinds of tests, all kinds of, MRI and EEG and that sort of thing. They didn't find anything. And so they wrote me a prescription and sort of sent me on my way. And so, my life has been changed ever since, living with epilepsy and understanding what that's all about, and seeking out sort of the best ways that I can to manage it. After the first seizure, the doctors at the hospital put me on Dilantin, and as a matter of fact, wrote the prescription wrong for it was supposed to be 100 milligrams 3 times a day. The doctor the intern wrote 300 milligrams 3 times a day, which sent me into a toxic state a week later. So it was not a great start, not a good experience, first experience with medication. But once we got it straight, the medication seemed to work. I went about 2 years seizure free. And after 2 years, I moved to a different state. And so every time you move, you've got to find a new doctor, a new neurologist and everything. And my new neurologist said, you've only had one seizure. Usually we don't start medicating until, you've had multiple seizures, and it's a full-on epilepsy diagnosis. She said, we could try weaning you off and sort of see what happens. And the side effects from the Dilantin were not great. I mean, it was, I gained weight. I felt tired often. I struggled with focus, cognitive focus sort of thing. And so I was actually pretty eager to give it a try. So we did. She weaned me off, slowly. And after about a month, I had another seizure. And so she said, well, okay, looks like we need to, it looks like this truly is epilepsy, and we truly need to keep you on medication. So she did change me to a different medication, oxcarbazepine, because it has a side effect profile that's a little less harsh. And so she put me on a prescription for that. And that was kind of it for a long time. I mean, it was take a pill in the morning, take a pill at night, and sort of live your life, and it worked, for a long time. Thankfully, I'm very lucky in that way. That medication has been very helpful to me. And so I went about 10 years before I had another seizure, and which was great. But I'll tell the story real quick. I mean, that seizure was a pretty major event. I was actually driving at the time on the highway, and sort of felt it coming on, sort of, heard music, again, I think my current neurologist says, it's probably a sign that my seizures begin as a focal seizure in the auditory center of the brain. then spread. So I started feeling that and realizing, oh, something's wrong here. Pulled the car over, quickly took an extra pill that I had, in my dashboard there. But it was too late. The next thing I knew, again, I was in the hospital, and my car weaved across 2 lanes of traffic, across a meridian, across 2 other lanes of traffic, and came to rest close to an abutment. By some miracle, no crash. The car was fine. I ended up fine. My dog in the back seat was fine. A very kind fire marshal took him home with him so that my wife could pick him up afterwards. Medication is great, and when it works, but when it doesn't, it's a bit of a scary, terrible thing. So at that time, and I was a few hours away from. I was actually on a long distance road trip, so I was a few hours away. My wife gets a call in the middle of a Sunday afternoon, says, your husband's been in an accident. We need you to come get him. So she quickly rounded up a couple of our close friends, and they came out, to a several hour trip, to come get me at the hospital. So, I'm very, very lucky to have, such good friends to help out. I guess the next thing that happened was I was went to my neurologist that I was seeing at the time. Very nice guy, and again, over the years, he would call it my drive-through appointment. Annually, I'd go see him, say hello, get a refill on my prescription, do a couple of blood tests, and off I went, kind of thing. So I kind of felt like, it was all well in hand in a way. So I went to see him and said, okay, I've had this seizure. What should we do? And he said, nah, I'm not too worried about it. I said, okay. And so he said, well, let's just increase the dosage on your medication. Okay, so we tried that. And then I went a few more months seizure free, and then had another seizure. This time was at work, right in the middle of a meeting in the conference room. It was somewhat of a stressful meeting. My boss was there, my colleagues were there, and next thing, again, seized and ended up at the hospital again, and the whole rigmarole. So there's sort of no more vulnerable feeling than being at work with your boss and everyone, and you're unconscious on the floor. But they were very good about it. They were very supportive, and that was great. So again, back to my neurologist. He said, well, let's increase the dosage again, and see what happens here. But in the meantime, I had actually heard, I had been looking into the low carb diet. I guess I kind of say I'd been playing around with low carb just for my weight, as middle-aged guy, putting on a few pounds, but little by little over the years. And so I had gotten into this low carb diet and just listening to some podcasts and reading about it and these things. And I happened to hear a podcast with Jim Abrams, who is the founder of the Charlie Foundation. And he was talking about the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. And I was, wait a minute, I hadn't heard that before. So at that point, I really started looking seriously into it, after that second seizure, and I guess this was 5 years ago now, and looked out, and I was lucky again in the sense that Johns Hopkins is an hour from where we live, and so I reached out to them and managed to get enrolled in their adult diet epilepsy program. So that really is where the journey began as far as the modified Atkins diet for me. When I started this job, I was, again, my seizures were pretty well under control, so I didn't necessarily bring it up or talk to anybody about it. So my boss and my coworkers were obviously very surprised when I had this seizure at work. I remember, and in fact, because I left campus on an ambulance, I had to get documentation, permission from a doctor to return to work a couple of days later. But that I kind of say that's when I was forced out of the closet. There's a psychologist, and I forget his name, but has written a paper about the epilepsy closet and sort of that effect where people don't, feel I don't know, ashamed or concerned about bringing it up because of the stigmas attached and all these things. And so I'm lucky that my boss and my coworkers were understanding and very supportive. So I'm an administrator at a community college, and so I'm able to work from home a couple of days a week. My boss was understanding about that. I mean, the biggest trouble was not being able to drive, and there's no good public transportation near my workplace. And so, for the time when my license was suspended, I'm taking an Uber to and from work, and that gets expensive. That gets difficult. Or try to bum a ride from coworkers. I mean, that's in a practical way. That's one of the most difficult things about it. But there's also, I think, there's a psychological effect of are people looking at me differently? Are people looking down on me in some way, or seeing me through this lens of being different? I remember, in fact, after that I had a seizure at work. My HR, a person from HR reached out to me to go through the paperwork and things. And she said, I'm also the college's ADA representative. So if you, if you want to go through any process with that, we can guide you through it. And ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I thought, disability, I've never thought of myself as someone who's quote unquote disabled, and so that was something of a reckoning and something of a moment where I had to think about this condition as how does this fit into my identity? And I think I'm still working through that in some ways. I think it's a continuing process. I did talk to my neurologist at the time. I was seeing a neurologist who was at a university here in DC, University Medical Center, and well regarded in the field of medication. So I talked to him and I said, what about this ketogenic diet? I would like to explore it. And he said, well, we don't do that here. And I said, well, okay, where do they do it? And that's where I really decided to sort of take it into my own hands, but really be more proactive in trying to seek this out, because I really felt that there was something here for me with the diet. Really my attitude is why not throw everything we can at this, right? And so, being able to be active, a participant in my treatment and not just waiting for a doctor to prescribe a medication, it's empowering.